Managing up, quiet quitting. Most people have a pretty dysfunctional relationship with their supervisors. While that may be the norm, it's far from optimal, and we shouldn't accept it as such. Dan Weir is the consummate camp professional and a great staff trainer who gave a session at ACA National and Tri-State about how to work with your boss, which we're going to dive into today. This is the Day Camp Pod. Welcome back, everybody, to the Day Camp Podcast. I'm Andy Pritikin, Director of Liberty Lake in the Philly suburbs of New Jersey.
I'm Sam Thompson from Crystal Lake Park District, Crystal Lake, Illinois.
And I'm Tiffany Yvonne, founder of Purposeful Play in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And we are joined today by the one and only Dan Weir. Woo! What's up, Dan?
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You feel like do you have imposter syndrome being on Day Camp Podcast? You know, you're like a resident camp guy, are you?
No,
did you ever go to day camp?
Are you kidding me? I spent the last 3 years running 7 day camps.
That's right.
Yeah, so this is more at home than anything else. It's very funny. You get positioned as an overnight or a day camp person, but I've gone back and forth. So and you know, also a day camp parent, so I have that perspective as well.
Good point. All right, so tell us your little camp backstory, Dan.
Yeah. So to make it short, 25 years in camping, with recently switching into consultancy. So I spent a majority of that time working for Foss Valley YMCA, managing the overnight camp programs there. I've also volunteered with Global Camps Africa. And then from 2020 to 2022, was managing 7 day camps across Long Island in 5 different towns for the Y of Long Island. And then just starting this past January, I've joined forces with David Phillips to be a full-time consultant in serving camps. And so really what that means is in terms of business development, strategic planning, and program quality assessment, using more camp-friendly terms, camper growth strategies, helping people recruit staff, tools to basically make your job easier. And it's turned out really well. And in terms of developing people and coaching, when we really look at camp, this topic is something that I hear a lot from when we talk about families. So I'm very excited to help not only employees be better, but also help bosses kind of bridge the gap with their own staff as well, too.
Awesome. Well, I got a couple of things to diverge from first. So first off, you mentioned Frost Valley. So I want people to get an idea of what you were managing, okay? Because it's not the typical, director of camping. Yeah. Right? Like how many kids were going to Frost Valley camp as campers in a calendar year?
Oh, geez. So the place served over 38,000 people a year.
A year.
We slowed
Not
down.
in total, a year.
A year. During the summer, we slowed down to having only 1,500 people on our property. At one time, daily. So, yeah. So the overnight camp made up I want to say 4/5 of that 1,500. So it was quite a bit. 9 overnight camping programs, and everything from a traditional overnight camping experience to teen adventure trips, to going out and doing survival programs in the woods, to a partnership with the Tokyo YMCA, to serving children with medical needs such as kidney disease, or also serving children with diverse abilities. So in terms of the spirit of the place, it was truly for all. And loved and cherished my time there. Met my wife there. My kids were actually born on camp property there. So definitely it's very much part of my family's identity and mine as well too.
All right. And then second thing you mentioned, you said Global Camps Africa, which is something that I am dying to do. One of these days, I'm going to get over there and do that. And you're the first person out of 100 plus episodes we've had that's ever been affiliated with that. Can you give people a little bit, the elevator pitch, the 1-minute elevator pitch on this, because it is an unbelievably cool program.
Yeah. Actually, you've had Brandwine on here, and Brandwine designed the staff training for Global Camps Africa. He was the first person to go over and to actually help design the training. So the story is amazing. The short version, Phil Lilienthal basically went over to South Africa and had worked previously with Greenpeace, had done some stint as a lawyer as well too, and really thought the transformational learning environment of camp could play a role in helping children in South Africa. And so specifically with HIV education. So 20 years ago, he creates this camp, and the goal always was for the camp to stand on its own. And where it is today, you basically have 2 entities. You have Camp Sizanani, which takes place outside of Joburg in South Africa, which is run by people from South Africa. And it operates a few times a year, serves as a one-time experience for kids. So a period of 2 weeks of camp, and then they go to kids clubs during the year. And then in the States, we have Global Camps Africa, which is the nonprofit that supports it. And there's a well number of camps and individuals that give to Global Camps Africa to support the education that's going over there. So I'll digress for 2 more seconds. Actually, this photo on the wall. One of the cool stories about Global Camps Africa is getting to actually see the skills and games and activities that we have, but use it in practical application. So I taught a lot of team building when I went over to go volunteer at Global Camps Africa at Camp Cisnati, and was able to do the activity called the human knot. You basically have everyone cross their hands and reach across and tangle, and then they have to untangle. And we were able, with this group of 13-year-old girls, to talk about how this is what it's like to face a challenge you can't see your way out of. So for instance, if you became pregnant at a young age, you have to rely on people and you have to communicate. And so be able to process that with them, where they're facing different challenges than typically somebody in the States would, and to really kind of talk about all the skills that we know in terms of interpreting and being able to problem solve, all those different aspects of 21st century skills was just amazing. And it's an incredible program and truly transformational.
And they have a lady, Emily, that is sort of their point person in America, right? And she shows up at all the conferences, and you should introduce yourself to her, because what Dan was alluding to is that they take volunteers, like people like us, like American camp directors. We can go because they are on the other side of the equator. So their summer is our winter. So you could spend your Christmas break at that camp that Dan was mentioning, doing your camp thing. And it is just a transformative experience for you, the volunteer, to do it.
Yeah. December 2008, I spent 3 weeks over there. It was fantastic. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And Emily,
now that I'm an empty nester. Yeah, she is incredible. And now that I'm an empty nester, I am all about it. So Sam, empty nester, grandma, I think you should come with me. What do you think? All right. All right. And then the last thing, Dan, before we get into how to talk to your boss. Okay. Since you are not a poser, you are a day camp guy now. You're an official day camp guy. So what is the sleepaway camp spirit? If you were trying to tell a day camp to get their camp act together and provide that magical thing that sleepaway camps do, like, what are we talking about? How do you boil that down?
So I could digress on this for a while. I'll try to sum it up. The best day camps know how to use overnight camps culture in terms of forming a bond and keeping people intact, and being a encompassing and spirit experience throughout their whole time with them. So whether it's a week or whether it's the entire summer, and making it this journey in that sense. And the best overnight camps know how to maximize time like day camps do, because day camps are the best by far at maximizing every little minute, right? Because the kids get dropped off by the bus, and we got to get them back on the bus, and we got to leave them on a high, and they got to have a good day, or else we're going to hear about that night from the parents. So there's a lot to learn from each session. I used to lead a session with Joanne Warren Smith, particularly on this topic, about how the culture aspects of overnight camp can complement day camp, and day camp can complement overnight camp with maximizing time.
Right. So a day camp, which in its lowest form would be pretty transactional. It's just a daycare kind of situation, right? Whereas at sleepaway camp, you sort of bleed blue and green or whatever, the colors are there, and your camp friends become your closest friends, and you want to come back year after year, and you want to be a staff person. Like, you create that sense of culture and community. And that's really the challenge for a day camp to do, especially a big number day camp.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. 100%.
All right, Dan, without any further delay, talking to your bosses, I don't think I'm a very intimidating person, but when you're the boss, you're the boss. And it sort of just creates this dynamic, this power dynamic that is undeniable. And that most bosses, even though they were on the other side of that at one time, they lose perspective of it themselves. They lose the empathy themselves. And I think that's sort of that starts the dysfunction that I was talking about.
Yeah, it's so funny. So when coming up with this topic, I first started looking at the issue that basically the generation that's coming into workforce now, so used to being able to search for answers instantly, be able to to get hacks, to have explicit knowledge, as well as that they're starting work later than other generations have, right? So often when they're coming into work in a day camp setting, this is their first job ever. Where I started working at 14, I was even working before that under the books, but like by the time I got to a day camp counselor age, I had many jobs, and I knew how to build some of the things that we're going to talk about. So that was part one of it. And then the second is recognizing that just times have changed. Things have rapidly changed over the past 5 years, but to assume that the tactics and the incentives for performance and just, having a good rapport, everything has changed so radically that we really have to go back to fundamentals. So the session that I lead at Tri-State and National, it really boils down to just trust, communication, and problem solving, and recognizing that it is on the employee as much as it is on the supervisor. So a lot of times the employee feels like, oh, the supervisor has to build trust with me, has to build communication with me, has to build problem solving with me. But the truth is that it's just as much on the employee, if not more, because it's tied to their daily performance. And when I lead the session, I deliver in a way that if your boss was in the room, you would appreciate it. I mean, there's literally a slide that says, recognize the power dynamic. And your boss, if your boss was in the room, your boss would say like, yeah, recognize the power dynamic. But for that group, they need to hear that, yeah, it is not a family. We might have a close relationship, but it really is a power dynamic. So there's a ton of nuances in a working relationship that just don't happen elsewhere. And if it's someone's first job, and we have to essentially have a reset because people haven't worked for a while or they haven't worked ever, it's important to kind of put a level ground on it. So that's what this is. And also talks about bosses are human. There's a huge distrust with authority right now, and in all senses, whether it's government or just in any aspect of it, right? So it's basically talking about how bosses are human, not perfect. I literally have a slide that says that. So it's kind of bridging that gap, and it's gotten rave reviews. And I just got an email today from someone that said that it really helped them, and they're already having a better relationship with their boss because of it. So it's needed.
Yeah, well, I appreciate what you're saying about it's a two-way street. I feel like very often the people that work under me, they're expecting me to handle everything. They're expecting me to initiate all meetings. They're expecting me to sort of keep them on task. They're expecting all the stuff. And my bandwidth is only so big. And I need self-starters that are coming to me and saying, Andy, I need 10 minutes of your time, and that kind of thing. But I don't think that comes naturally to people to do that. I think people like being told what to do.
Yeah, it's funny. So there's one of the things I break down in terms of problem solving is this acronym called RACI. So it's responsible, accountable, consulting, and informing. And when I break that down for folks, I talk about how you were hired to basically be responsible for something, to take care of something, right? So whether it's getting kids off the bus or doing an activity, like that is, you're responsible in that moment. But if you want to move up in the organization, if you want to have more responsibility, if you want to be seen in a different light, you want to build more trust, the way you should think about it is that you want to become accountable. Right. So accountable is the person that owns it. Accountable is if it doesn't happen, it's on them. And when you spell that difference out for folks, a little light bulb goes off, because you realize, oh, I've just been, taking care of tasks, and then I go to Andy when I have an issue, and Andy's the accountable one. But when you tell them, no, I really want you to own it and own all aspects of it, and it's yours, and you need to make sure it gets done, and it's on you to actually take initiative to answer your own questions and research. That makes you accountable. That's the type of employee we want you to be with your area. It just clicks, and I think that's what folks need to hear in their setting, is that if you're in charge of arts and crafts, don't come to Andy when the paint's run out. Instead, come to Andy and say, hey, I need to purchase this, and I'm purchasing it right now. Can I have the credit card number? Or if that's what you need, because then that's the consulting relationship you have. Andy, I need this, or I need some wisdom. It's not making Andy have to put the order in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, the response to that, when suggested, is, well, I don't want to step on his toes. Well, I don't want to bother him. That kind of thing. Like it's almost like a societal thing. Like that's how people are wired. I mean, maybe it's from having bad experiences with authoritative bosses who have just been nasty about stuff, or it's just a misconception. But it drives me crazy. I mean, 100%. It really does.
That
Yeah.
situation I had this morning really emphasizes the responsible versus the accountable,
All right,
because
hold on, Sam, it's got to tell the viewers what
tell the
happened this morning.
story. Okay.
Okay.
So I just had to let go a guy who's really good with the kids, but this was his first job. And he thought that even though he was hired for 5 days a week from 6:15 in the morning to 8:30, that he could come in at 7 or 7:15 or 2 days a week or 3 days a week. And every week was different. And he would call, but he would say, oh, I did the text message in the afternoon, but it didn't go through until 1 in the morning. He had every excuse in the book. And when he was there, he was very responsible. He was wonderful, but he wasn't owning that he was accountable for the job he was hired for. So when I let him go today, I said, I will recommend you to work with kids because you're doing great, but I want to cut you loose now so you can find a job that's meeting your needs. And right now's the time to let you be free to go do that. So, but yeah, it was hard because his first job, not really getting the difference.
Yeah. And that's the part too, where I think you're a good supervisor, right? Like you're having this conversation with them, you're being upfront with them. But for some folks, they're not. You have to kind of front load that, right? And that's when we talk about us as supervisors, we have to say to them at the beginning of it, be like, you're owning this. You're really like, I'm trusting you to take care of it, and which you sounds like you did in the conversations you're having. And that is the part that is on us as supervisors, is to kind of bridge that gap. But 100%, we need to be pushing them to be more accountable. And accountability, people automatically correlate with getting fired. They don't think of it in the terms of growth. And we need to help educate them that accountability is a good word, and it means that you'll own more of what you get to do, and it means you get more freedom, and it's redefining it for them. And that's what so much of this session is. When I talk with people about it, it's redefining things they already know.
Yeah, I love that that you talk about it as a two-way street, because it really is, right? And not only I think that's important for employees, especially if they're new, to know, but I also think it's a refresh for owners or directors or leaders in whatever capacity, to know that the communication is key, because times have changed and people do have different work experiences. And so I guess I'm curious of advice you have for leaders who are used to doing things the old way, where they still have the expectation that people should come in and they should know. Because I think on the flip side, that's what I get a lot of like leaders feeling like, I'm paying you, this is your job, you read the job description, you should know that you should own it because it was in the job description, as opposed to like really knowing how to verbalize that and communicate in a way that creates an open door where employees can come in and feel comfortable, having a vulnerable conversation about what they may not know. Because what I see from younger people is like, they don't want to admit that they don't know, because the leader puts on airs, like they are all knowing. So it's not easy for them to have that conversation. So what would you say to leaders who are used to doing it one way and might want to step into this change?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's still funny. There's so many communication workshops. There's just so many different ways to think about communication. And part of it in the session, right, I talk about how the best way to learn your boss's communication style is just to ask, because often how they're communicating is different than you might be receiving, and talk about how, an idea leaving your brain and then it being encoded, and then the message it goes through, whether it's text or email or in person, and then how they receive it, and then what they give back to you in terms of information. That's 5 steps for things to go wrong. And in terms of communication, we always listen, but sometimes we listen just to respond, and we're not actually taking the words in. And I think as a boss, we have to role model that, which is not always possible, right? Like the especially, as the days get closer, right? Like I was talking with Andy earlier, it's 108 days to the beginning of the camp season in New York, New Jersey. And when you start thinking about how communication happens, it gets shorter and shorter as you go, when you need them to take more accountability. So that's where kind of having an open-ended conversation of, this is how I'm going to be communicating to you, and I need you to go back and forth. And I'll give you a clear example. So texting is really funny. I was driving in Long Island traffic from one site to the other. This is when I worked for the Weir Long Island, and was texting a supervisor, and was using Siri car text. Siri got CarPlay, so Siri's like translating my text for me. So Siri's putting in perfect punctuation. Well, it was also hectic traffic, so I in the middle was like, sounds great. I will confirm with you later today, and it wrote with a period at the end of it. Well, I get to the office at 9. Boss doesn't say anything until about 4:30 p.m. Pulls me in the office and was like, you were really disrespectful earlier when we were communicating, and what's going on between us, and like just pretty much jumped on me of it. And I said, I'm sorry, I gotta be honest that Siri was translating my text, and did not try to come off rude at all. I was in traffic and I just wanted to get to work safely, and I took care of that for you today, so don't worry about it. It's all good. And it's so funny because once I had that moment with her, it all broke down. We had a good laugh about it. But that's years of my working experience, knowing that my boss probably didn't understand the full situation, where somebody else who's new in a workplace might not even think to kind of explain the circumstances of what's going on. So that's why the communication is so key in terms of knowing each other's style, being graceful in those moments, and also just kind of recognizing that there's sometimes even generational differences. And I talk about generations as well in the presentation, but that's the gratitude needs to come through constantly, and remembering making sure people feel good is a key aspect. It's a responsibility of all employees to do that with their boss, to make sure your boss thinks positively of you. So
all right. Well, before we go on, I got to give a shout out to our friends at CRS, Commercial Recreation Specialists, because the Day Camp podcast is brought to you by them. They help sponsor this. You wouldn't be getting this if they weren't helping with that. So they are the fine purveyors of the best recreation solutions to keep camp going strong. And one of the things that they have are these things called prime carts, which are these really cool pedal go-kart things, which are super durable. They can really endure many seasons at your camp, as I have done with them. They come in all shapes and sizes. They're great for all ages. They're set up. You can set them up for time races, relay races. They could just be a free play thing, right? They, you put a single rider in there and they just get up and go, right? Even preschoolers. So check it out at CRS4rec.com. CRS is serious about fun. All right, Dan. So the generational thing is something that Tiff was sort of alluding to a little bit, is that these young folks, all right, not to sound like an old codger, but these young folks, they sort of seem like we're doing them a favor by, even having them, like, the statement that a bunch of my colleagues said last summer was, why do I get the sense that we're working for them? Like this dynamic now. And I do feel like that's shifting back to relative normal, if you want to call that normal, what normal is, because we were so reliant on them just being a warm body, right? So Sam's got this guy, she needs him for 2 hours a morning. And if he's going to give an hour and 15 minutes twice a week, she's like, for 4 months, she's just like, well, that's better than nothing, kind of thing. So, I mean, I think that has made the boss relationship with people a little bit different, because we've been a lot more permissive than we would normally, from the pandemic till now. And now I think that a lot of bosses were trying to sort of get the ship back on course again.
Yeah, 100%. I've got a bunch of thoughts here. So let me digress for 2 seconds. So my daughters, I got a 7-year-old, 9-year-old, they're Gen Alpha, right? They talk about this generation that's coming through is going to be one of the most resilient and also loud generations ever to come through, partly because they lived through a pandemic where they didn't know if they're going to go to school the next day. They didn't know what the instructions were going to be. And then the technology that they're most used to is yelling at Alexa. And my kid, my 7-year-old, when she was like 4, would say goodnight to Alexa like it was a human, right? So like,
oh my God, help us.
Yeah. So if you think about the next generation coming into workforce in 5 years, that's who it's going to be, right? So yeah, I can see Andy's face in this moment, right? So it's very funny in that sense, right? Oh yeah, Tiff too. All right, so that's one aspect. Second aspect of it, I don't know how nice way to say it. If you work at a bar and you don't like alcohol, what are you doing there, right? If you're working in youth development and you don't like kids, then you're gonna struggle day to day, right? So like, I really encourage people to find a place of patience in this and to bite their lip and to take the high road when necessary. At the same point in time, right? Going exactly agreeing with Andy is this generation that is coming through in Gen Z, right? They're labeled as progressive but disloyal. That is the label, right? They'll advocate for people, but they have no problem kind of quitting on you in that sense, right? But when we look at previous generations as well too, we all have our mistakes as well. So like, like I'm an ex-millennial, so I'm independent, but I'm bleak, right? So when we talk about bleak, if you ever heard me behind the scenes talking about New York State government and working on policies and working on things to kind of just make sure the laws are actually working well for camps. If I'm talking one-on-one to the lobbyist that works on this, who's amazing, who's also Gen X, we could sound pretty bleak, so like it, but we know that we're going to work through it. So it's important in these stereotypes to really challenge them and to really explicitly say, like, look, you might be thinking this, but this is what I'm trying to come across and get to you. It takes more time, and that's unfortunate. That's on us to do that. But I also talk about when I lead the session with staff is to think, look, if you're a Gen Z person, your boss thinks that you're ready to quit because that's what they hear the stories from everyone else. And you need to know when you go to them that you need to be sensitive about that and to really play into, if you know that there's this negative stereotype about your generation, to address that in the immediacy when you're problem solving, you're communicating. So like, for instance, going back to me being an ex-millennial, there was a joke about me at both the organizations I worked for previously to go into consulting, was that if the numbers were good, if the enrollment numbers were good, I would sound like, okay, well, we got to keep going. I would sound pretty bleak. But if the numbers were bad, I would be very positive and be like, okay, we could do this. We could do this, And so, we're all guilty of generational stereotypes, but it's really being able to know what yours are and being able to bridge them with the person that you're communicating with.
Yeah, I can hold a pretty contrarian view to most things, right? So I love, first of all, I call it exennial. What'd you call it?
Excellent. I don't know. It's funny. Luke Skywalker is the
we're
image,
like caught
right?
in that bubble.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, however you pronounce it, we're like caught in that bubble. And people never, like, they always think I made it up. So I congratulate you for being a fellow one, right? But so when Andy was like, this is what Tiff's talking about, I usually fall on the side of the millennials, right? Because I think that old school leadership, like, I don't even like the word boss. Like, I'm just like, who wants to be bossed around? So if you're my boss, I already don't like you. Like, I don't want a boss. That's why I work for myself. So I use the word leaders all the time. And even when people use the word, like when they like, well, my boss said, and I say, though, the person who leads your organization, because it just changes the feel, like, in the fuzziness of the interaction for me. So for me, I don't use the word boss, and I don't even use the word, like, my employees, I say my team members, because I just feel like if we want them to come to us with, the personable and relationship and to really take ownership, we are in a space where people no longer have to leave their feelings at home, like come to work and show up. The pandemic amplified that for us. And it was like, we were never really able to do it, but because people, I'm 45, so people my age and older were required to do it and they did it well, then as leaders, we believe that other people should be able to do it too. And you talked about your child saying goodnight to Alexa. My kids say, I love you to Alexa, and she sings a song back. She sings the song back.
Oh God!
Right?
Yeah,
and so
yeah,
it's like, but if you're talking, when they tell me they love me, I'm just like, love you too. And I'm thinking, like, I might need to sing like Alexa, right? So that they know that I love them more than this robot. So Andy's like shaking his head, and I understand because I am 45. But the truth of it is, we got to really work as leaders to like change with the times and know that a lot of what we were subjected to wasn't emotionally intelligent or like really emotionally healthy. We just built resilience by going through it. So I love what you're saying. I just think it's very much on both people, and it's nice to hear that employees should step up and take some agency and ownership in this, while also knowing, because I get the feel that like our listeners might be like, yeah, they should be doing it. And I'm just like, yeah, us too. Like, it has to be
100%.
both parties.
Yeah, there's a few things. It's funny you say how to work with your boss. You would use how to work with your leaders. So I intentionally made the phrase boss instead of leaders because I was talking more about relationships. So when I actually open up this presentation, one of the things I talk about is how there's a term called the price of admission. So price of admission, the term comes from Dan Savage, who's a relationship advice columnist, and he talks about how there's no settling down without settling for, and that you always have to pay a price of admission. So the real example I give is that I love my wife. In order to be with her, she loves Christmas and Disney to a fanatical level. She's not a Disney cosplay person, but Andy could testify. We were at a conference for a few days, and every day I would show him photos of what my kids were doing. No one ever saw my family. Like, they didn't believe my family was actually there. They were out the door before anyone was up, and they were back after everybody went to bed and after the bars closed. I mean, they were getting back at like midnight. So,
if it wasn't for Facebook, I would not have believed that your kids were there.
Yeah, we rode
Yeah.
we rode an elevator together. That was it in the morning because I went to get breakfast earlier. So that's the price of admission, right? Like, that's I love my wife. In order to be with her, that is what I'm willing to put up with, right? And so when I open the session up is, bosses are not perfect, people aren't perfect, and there's all about what you're willing to put up with somebody, what you're willing to say, okay, this is who you are as a person. And we do that every day in every relationship we have in our life. So it's just, that's part of it, and I think it's hard because it seems like the tolerance of the workforce right now is much lower than it was before. But if we're coaching them on how to approach us, and we are being direct with them in a way that they could receive it, then that gap should close. And it's not perfect, right? It's a relationship. It's not science in that sense, and it's tied into feeling, but it's important, and it's important to kind of, we're in this job to mentor people. So that's really it.
Yeah, no,
All right.
I'll just say one more quick thing because I love this
No,
topic.
you go on. Go.
It's just that even as I say that, having a staff or a team of my own, there definitely has been that feel before where it's been like, all the things that are wrong here, and like, it should be perfect, right? Like, and my whole response has always been like, if it were perfect, I wouldn't need you. Like, you're here to help us make it better, right? And like, perfect is a fallacy. So just really like cutting that I guess sense of entitlement, or you should be perfect since you're the boss, or how can you like whatever that angst is that the younger generation can tend to have. Just like, no, it's not, like really being authentic that like, it's not perfect. That's why you're needed, and your ideas are warranted. Let's have a discussion about them so that we can make it even better with the collective, goal of it being great for kids. Like you said, like, we should be tied into that purpose. And I think that when we're tied into that purpose, both as the leaders or the boss of the organization and as the team members helping to serve, that it makes it better for the kids. And then our collective, like the thing we both care about, which should be the kids and their experience, is what keeps us going, even when, we may not see eye to eye.
Yeah, well, and that's a great point, Tiff, because I think that a lot of places where our seasonal leaders screw up, and maybe even full-time people too, is if you're a boss and you're 99% of your interactions are telling people when something is not perfect. Right. I think that, parents do that with kids sometimes too. That is not the way it should be. And at a camp where there's just variables out the wazoo, and you're just accepting that everything's a little gray, and as long as you're all heading in the right direction, then it's good. Right. It's incumbent on the bosses to be doing 5-minute manager stuff and just being, complimenting when things are good. And it's such a simple, easy thing to do. But for whatever reason, people get into the boss position and they feel like, that is less important, when that is equally as important, if not more important, as a thing, because you have to build that relationship. You have to build that trust in order to get that, in order for you guys to achieve the best relationship and the best product that you can.
100%. Yeah. Brand wines, describe, label, praise, right? Use that with your employees. Yeah. And it's even when your employees actually use it with you, that's even more amazing. Because
we use it with the kids. We train our staff to do that with the kids. But just one last thing. AM Skyer, my friends at AM Skyer. They've been doing this for a while. They're the leading insurance and strategic partner for many of the finest camps in America, 100 years. AM Skyer partners with camps to provide public relations, legal, medical, behavior support, and more. One of the things that they do, which I can't say enough about, is that we're heading to Tri-State next week, and they are the biggest supporters forever of Tri-State, of ACA National, of Project Maury, of Scope. I mean, of every conference, of every endeavor that the camp industry does. The AM Skyer name is pretty much on it. And they put their money where their mouth is. They support good causes. They support their camp in the things that we do. They support the underserved. They're truly great people. And I want to thank you guys for doing that. But they also are good insurance purveyors. So check them out at amskyer.com. I told the story at the last episode about how my office flooded, and I'm now back in my nice new office. You can check it out. There's my dog laying there. Looks like she's about to throw up. Cal, you okay? All right. She's not having a great time today. But I don't think the smell of the new carpet is hitting her so well. But anyway, back to you, Dan. I have a question. So we like getting practical here. Okay. So we're assembling our armies. Okay. We're getting our leadership teams together, our leadership teams, which are, these people in their 20s and 30s generally, who are now going to be managing these people in their teens and early 20s. And we want them to have that kind of relationship with their staff, like we're talking about, where they can be approachable on either ends, where they're the union reps for their staff, and their staff should know that. And their staff should be able to come to them when they messed up or when they need help, and all those kind of things. And yet we hire these great, we tend to hire a lot of really high aspiring kids to be these frontline people who are like straight A kids who are not used to messing up. And they don't want to go to their bosses and ask for help because of that dynamic that we're talking about. How can we help set this stage for the summer so that we can have a good working relationship, a trusting relationship, a functional relationship?
Yeah, that's great. Before I answer that, I am also a fan of AM Skyer. I'm actually a Skyer partner, and I do trainings for AM Skyer as well too. So I could not love them, more than enough. So, but yeah. So going back at the beginning of the show, we talked about RACI, so responsible, accountable, consulting, informed. I think as a supervisor, we could go to our staff and say, I want you to know that I want you to inform me about an issue with this. I want you to consult with me about an issue of this severity. And I am ultimately accountable to make sure every child goes home in a better condition than they came to camp. Meaning, so like if you talk about safety, I'm accountable at the end of the day. If a child is not going home in the same condition, whether they got hurt or whether there was something awful that happened to them that might involve authorities, that accountability is on me. I need to be informed immediately. When it's consulting, I want to know if you don't have the supplies that you need to get there, or whatever that lane is for you as a camp director, whatever you could help problem solve quickly for them and that is a priority. And then the informing is just the basic relationship of all. You want to know what's happening in your camp. So set up channels for being informed. And it doesn't have to be direct face-to-face communication. For instance, daily reports in camps are nothing new, but I'm always blown away at the amount of camps that have no form of daily reporting, meaning that just here's how the child's day was, just a one-liner on them, or rating the child's day on a scale 1 to 5. So as a camp director, or doing that through the channels of mid-level management. So if you really break down that accountable, consulting, informed for your staff and bucket for them, I want to know if a child has an issue at waterfront because that's involving water and that's dangerous, that I'm accountable for that. Consulting, program supplies of that nature, something where you could get fixed the next day, or, it's not an immediate issue. And then informing is just the basic level that, if I see a parent in town, they come up to me and they say, hey, did you hear about this? I don't want that moment where I don't know that answer, and really break it down into those buckets, and then tell them the ways you want to be communicated to. So if it's informing, you could just send me a quick text or an email If it's consulting, I do best face-to-face or via phone. So we do need to talk actually verbally, so I can understand your question. And accountability, I need you to drop everything and find me. I don't carry a radio for the sake of it, and really kind of paint the true picture. And you should do that session with your immediate people underneath you. And that session should similarly be done down the chain as well. You don't have to be present there for your mid-level managers to do that with their frontline staff, but they should know how to communicate with you. When I worked at Frost Valley, Jerry Hunkowski was the CEO. I used to say, okay, in these moments, you could go straight to Jerry if you can't find me, in this moment, right? So that they should know how to move up the chain as well too, and really give them explicit instruction. And in some ways, it's funny if we talk about generations again. If you gave me explicit instruction at 19, I would have rolled my eyes. You give someone 19 now explicit instruction, like, oh, thank you, I wanted to know how to do this. That's the difference, right? So just really being specific about how you want to be communicated, what you want to be communicated, will lay down a great foundation for your summer.
Dan, are you gonna give us some material for the show notes that talk more about RACI? Because I really like that.
Yeah,
I'd
definitely
love to use it in training.
Yeah, 100%. I borrowed that from the book Game Storming, so I'll give you the link to the book, and I'll give you the page of it as well too, that aspect. But it's great. I mean, honestly, we use it in strategic planning processes as well too, so you don't get lost in it. Use it in fundraising, so people know what their role is. But it's a really great way to kind of break down the acronym, and I can't take credit for it. It's been around in business for quite some time. It's even been in MBA programs. So.
Yeah, any resources you can give us, Dan, send along our way. We'll put it in the show notes for everybody to check out with your contact information, of course. So before we wrap up, are there any other points of this topic that you want to make sure you get in here?
Yeah, so it's funny, when we talk about overall, we know how to work with children, right? So if it annoys some of us as a workforce that we have to start at such a fundamental level, but if we take the patience and channel that with our staff, and then really be explicit about trust, communication, and problem solving, we'll get there. You need to encourage an atmosphere where they will seek advice, whether it's from you or it's from their supervisor. We have to recognize the awkwardness. Day camp doesn't have the awkwardness that overnight camp does, where you live where you work, where your boss is literally your landlord. But there is still some awkwardness for some folks in a day camp setting, where they might have known you for a long time, or you might have been their director when they were a kid. If you have a really fantastic camp program, people come up that pipeline. I was always shocked to learn how many people were intimidated by me because they knew me since they were 7, and so just really recognizing that people could put you on this pedestal and provide that information, and then just make sure you're communicating the why and what you're doing. Again, you're the boss in this scenario, so you might not feel like you need to communicate why, but sometimes that extra little sentence really does all the extra work that you need to, and it could stop things from kind of manifesting. But yeah, other than that, just take the time that you would with anyone else. Time's the greatest gift we could give to people.
Yeah, I mean, intentionality, it's important. And you said a couple of things that I say all the time, I want to sort of restate. One of them is that the relationship that you as this, ultimate supervisor have with your next level people, it should really be synchronized with the relationship that they have with the frontline people. It should be the same stuff that you're saying, same thing that you're doing, same way that you're acting, same level of respect, same expectations, right? It's really, really synchronized, right? And then the fact that, he was saying, put the time in with your staff, like you put it in with your campers. And I think that we're all getting a great lesson in that right now, in that we've spent years working on camper recruiting, and we were all experts at camper recruiting. And now the campers are coming, and now we're focused on staff recruiting. And we're realizing, wow, look at all the stuff we could have been doing, that we should have been doing, that we are doing now. And because we're being real intentional about it, all of a sudden it's super important when it should have always been super important. But so the same thing goes during the summer. Yeah, we're worried about, we're worried about camper behaviors, and we're worried about campers being happy, but we're just as we're just as concerned about the staff too. And we joke around, the old timers like myself, and we say, when we were younger and we would go to a camp conference, we would sit around and just talk about the crazy kids, the crazy parents. Now all we do is talk about the staff. That is literally like 90% of our conversation. How was your summer? Right? That conversation is that stem with that. So we're realizing now, I think that's one of the COVID silver linings, frankly, and everything that has happened since then, the staff reckonings and stuff, is that we're all recognizing the importance of this relationship.
Your retention, your camper enrollment will go up if you pour into your staff. The staff will be happier. The retention of your kids will come back year after year. It will go up if you pour the same energy in there.
Yeah,
Happy staff, happy campers.
literally. When you were talking about the book, I think you said game storming, it made me think about, in clarity, Brene Brown always says, like, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Like, it's the easiest, simplest sentence to say, like Andy was saying, like, let's practice with our staff what we want them to practice with the campers, and just really being clear about expectations around what accountability and being informed means. Can just, it's like simple, not easy. You know, it's like, yeah, all you got to do is just say what you want, say how you want to be told, say how you want to be talked to. And it's like, why didn't we think of that? It's simple, not easy.
But coming full circle, I think that really is the essence of this boss relationship with the next level down, is the lack of clarity. It's that awkwardness and it's that lack of clarity, and people don't know when to say it, how to say it, who to say it, all that kind of stuff. And meanwhile, the boss is just like, friggin' say it, you know? So, or they're saying that and they don't even mean that. Who the hell knows? It's unclear. And so I like that, Dan, you were saying, you know, how to set the stage, how to be clear and ask for that kind of stuff. You know, we have a great one-page Michael Brandwine, how to ask for help, SOS thing, right? I don't know how effective it is, but we try to explain this to them. We try to set the stage for them. That speaking up and asking for help and that kind of thing is actually a sign of intelligence, not a sign of lack of intelligence.
Yeah, and just you have to continue to set it, continue to as to a nauseating point, right?
Yeah, no, pre-camp is great, but it's, you know, it's quickly forgotten, right? These are things that need to get hammered in, you know, throughout and need to be part of your culture, no doubt about it. 100%. Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
You are one of the smart guys at camping, and we appreciate it. And so how do we get in touch with you and your new consulting gig?
Yeah, so my contact information will, of course, be in the show notes, but just dan@immersivefirst.com is my email address. And then on social media, it's Dan Loves Camp. You can find that on Instagram, Twitter, and obviously LinkedIn as well, too. You can just search my name, but always happy to talk. I talk with a lot of camp folks, and be happy to just, if you need an ear, if nothing else, you know, reach out.
Thanks. So we want to thank the Go Camp Pro team, AM Skyer, and Commercial Recreation Specialists for allowing us to bring this podcast to you. If you like what you hear, then you should subscribe to the Day Camp Pod on your favorite podcast platform. Check out the show notes from all our episodes at daycamppodcast.com, as well as contact info for the show, our guest, Dan Weir, and for me and Tiff and Sam. Thanks for listening and making yourself a better Day Camp Pro. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of the Day Camp Pod.